Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. It's Lee Henson, President, Founder of Agile Dad, and it's time for today's episode of the Daily Stand-Up. So without any further ado, let's get started. Today, I wanted to talk to you about an article that just came out a couple of weeks ago. Now, someone was digging deep to get all this put together, and I applaud their diligence in trying to get this all pulled together. And they came up with an article that was called Agile Waste, Stop Using Story Points Now. I want to go on record and say I still believe that story points are a good thing, even though some of the creators of Agile and even the person who created story points says, if I would have known what people have done to it now, I wouldn't have done it. So let's give you just a rundown. So it starts off with Ron Jefferies. So Ron was the person who created story points. And here's what he had to say. Quote, he says, beware of using story points. They turn out to have been a bloody mistake. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that may have been taken out of context. I think what he was trying to say here, and I'm going to have to try to get him on for an interview, but I think what he's trying to say here is that if you are using story points incorrectly, that it is a mistake to use story points, because if you start tying story points back to things, you're going to end up in a conundrum where story points really aren't as meaningful as they should have been. So when he summarized what he called waste, he says, I think using story points to predict when will be done is at best a weak idea if it's tied back to time. I think tracking how actuals compare with estimates is at best wasteful. Once again, time. I think comparing teams on quality or estimates or on velocity, comparing team to team, is harmful. I agree with all three of those sentiments, but it doesn't necessarily mean just because those sentiments are there that it means that story pointing is a waste of time. I think we're talking about two different things here, right? So Ken Schwaber, they got a quote from him. He says, anytime we spend worrying about velocity or capacity is a waste, and not adding a whit of value. I agree with that. If we're sole focused as a business on, let's focus on just velocity and story points and how many points is this team doing versus this team or whatnot, if you're not leveraging velocity or capacity correctly, it is a waste. And I believe that these two really well-respected individuals in the Agile community are giving us sound advice here. They're not necessarily saying it's wrong, but this is the quote that stood out the most to me in the article right here. It says, velocity has been weaponized against agility and adaptability. It appears when a creation of value is less important than the ability to measure the output. So when you start focusing on measuring output instead of focusing on outcome, which is what I drive all along, then that's when you're going to see that story points become a bad idea. So I hear teams all the time talk about how their organization tries to say, we need to increase our velocity or we need to increase our organizational efficiency. And some teams are performing at a lower efficiency than other teams. Some individuals, I've even heard teams and organizations use story points at the individual level. Why is Johnny not doing as many story points as Matt is? Or why is Sylvia way ahead? It's amazing to me. And I love what Jim Highsmith had to say about this. Now, Jim and Alistair were the two who literally penned, I believe it might have even been Jim, who penned the Agile Manifesto on the board at the meeting. And here's what he said. He said, companies are often maniacal about measuring velocity. Velocity is thereby killing their agility. I agree. When you take this to the extreme and it starts causing more damage than good, you need to take into effect and reconsider what story points mean and why you're using them. So I think that in order to mitigate the damage, we need to start looking at what we're truly trying to measure, what are we trying to figure out, and how are we adding value? So Martin Fowler, another who was there for the manifesto signing, said, estimates end up being actively harmful as they encourage feature devotion, a nasty condition where people start valuing ticking off features more than tracking the real outcome of the product. Once again, these are not, and I want to make sure I emphasize this, because I think someone may have designed this article to mislead people, and that makes me frustrated. These quotes are not quotes to say story points are bad, don't use them. This person pulls in all of these concepts and all of these quotes taken out of context in order to promote a personal agenda of what they believe these people are trying to interpret, when in actuality, I don't think that that was the situation at all. Even when we address story points correctly, it's hard for us to get our head around them. It's hard for organizations to. But I love what Alistair had to say. So here's what he said. He said, Kent Beck and Martin Fowler wrote down, he says, I don't even know who started it, a brilliant strategy. That strategy was called yesterday's weather, and people aren't talking about it enough. You can only bid on what you completed last month or last sprint or last iteration. You can't overbid repeatedly. And he says, quote, yeah, you should do this. And I think it's one of these things where if you understand and you look at story points as a measure of what you've done in the past so that you can track what a team's true velocity is, not tying it back to time, but understanding that we set a benchmark for small, then we can get clarification. And I mean, story points are actually very simple if you have a good, strong, agile coach to help you understand them. But I think too many organizations tie them back to time, and it's just killing everything that we're doing. And, I think Ron Jefferies closed the quote out with this. He says, after all the confusion surrounding story points, he says, I feel like I may have invented story points. And if I did, I'm sorry. And I don't think that he means that in a stop using it. The way this article closed really frustrated me. It says, congratulations, you can now give your company an easy win and just stop using story points. That's great. That's like me saying, stop drinking water. If you don't have an alternate solution or you don't have something, this is a wine and cheese party, and this person brought all the wine and no cheese. There's no solution to what we should be doing. So the simple solution is this. If you get a highly qualified agile coach to guide your organization for an hour or less to understand how to correctly leverage story points without using time-based estimates so that you can get your head around what they really mean and so that you can use this to increase your accuracy for estimation and forecasting, story points are perfect. And they really do a fantastic job. But the second you fall back into those bad habits of tying story points to time, weaponizing them, using them as something to compare to other people, of course they're horrible. And I'd rather be without them altogether than use them wrong. And I think that's the message we should be sending. Now, if you're using story points incorrectly, you shouldn't be using them at all. But if you're using story points correctly, they can be an incredibly valuable tool to help you and your organization gain efficiency, agility, and success. Well, that's going to do it for today. I hope that this message resonates with you. I know it's going to cause some controversy. As always, we encourage you, if you have a question or a topic you want us to cover on the Daily Stand-Up, reach out to us. Learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.